Warning. Themes discussed on today's episode include Satanism, violence, homophobia, arson, anti-Semitism, desecration of animal remains, suicide, murder, and more. If you are not comfortable with the discussion of these subjects, then this is probably not the episode for you. For everyone else, strap in, motherfuckers! It's black metal time!
Welcome to HM 101 Breaking News with your host, John McKeever.
Tragedy occurred in Oslo last night, where the brutally murdered body of 25-year-old musician Øystein Aarseth, also known as Euronymous, was discovered in the stairwell outside of his flat. Authorities tell us Aarseth was stabbed a total of 23 times in his head, neck, and back. Investigations are ongoing, but current suspicions point to a cabal of local satanic musicians who may also have been responsible for the recent epidemic of church arsons across Norway. This is a developing story.
John! Here we sit, encircled by the icy frosts of winter. The world, it seems, is locked within a pagan frozen darkness. There's no end in sight. The Judeo-Christian God is dead, and our only hope is to embrace the cruel Norse gods of old and to pray that our deaths be but honorable. John, it is, at long last, time for us to talk about Norwegian black metal. This is quite literally the most exciting thing that has ever happened in the entire history of the world. No?
No.
Now, John, I always forget this. Are you more of a death metal guy or are you more of a black metal guy?
I hate both of these.
You're in a dark place, aren't you, John?
This is going to be painful.
I just want you to know that it means a lot to me, that you're going to tough it out, you're going to work through your demons, inner and outer, and it's going to happen. It's all going to happen. We're going to get through this together. Now, my own nascent interests in extreme metal were inspired by the very body of work under discussion today. I've long had something of an unhealthy obsession with the Norwegian black metal of the early 1990s. I love death metal, of course, but black metal was my first extreme love. So let's stop the pussyfooting around and dive right on in to the inky, wine-dark seas of black metal.
Overview, definition, prehistory, and the first wave of black metal.
Conventional wisdom divides the early history of black metal into two waves, with the first taking place across the 1980s and the second being primarily centered around the controversial Norwegian scene that came to international attention in the early 1990s and which will be the principal focus of today's discussion. So, as we are sometimes wont to do here, I thought we could look outwards in an effort to find ourselves a reasonably coherent definition for black metal. In order to mollify the rigorous academic standards of my co-host, I have decided to look to the published literature to see what some respected heavy metal historians might have to say on this matter. John, the literature! Are you impressed?
I am a little impressed. I assumed you were going to ask me to define it up top.
I mean, if you were to choose to define it, I have a feeling that it would not be a very objective, friendly definition. So I chose not to do that.
You sure you don't want to find out?
How does John define black metal? Please, I do want to know. I'd like to find out, yes.
I would define black metal as average to good heavy metal instrumental music utterly ruined by the inclusion of either asinine noises or what you could call singing if you wanted to insult the entire art form at its core.
Fuck you!
Ladies and gentlemen, John McKeever.
Hey, that started with positivity. Did you hear the positivity?
I did. I was actually a little bit surprised that you were able to look beyond some of the more challenging sonic elements, some of those noises you mentioned, some of the very low fidelity production on a lot of this material, and to find the fact that underneath it all, there's some pretty kick-ass heavy metal churning away.
Average to good.
Tomato, tomato. All right. I am very pleased with your definition. It's really nice. It's very helpful. I think it sets us off on the right course. But why don't you read us some select quotes from said literature and see if those might help us to define black metal.
In Louder Than Hell, Widerhorn and Truman wrote, quote, "Black metal, the most controversial and titillating metal scene, is steeped in history, mythology, and demonology. For some, the occult was a vehicle to expression, not a platform for worship. But for others, the glorification of man's dark side and exaltation in anti-Christian deities is as important as the blazing guitars, crushing beats, and banshee vocals." In A History of Heavy Metal, Andrew O'Neill wrote of black metal, quote, "It started as a rejection of the aesthetic and attitude of death metal, a scene which they perceived as having lost its appeal due to its popularity with jocks and its lack of real grimness." In The Complete Headbanging History of Heavy Metal, Ian Christie wrote, quote, "Black metal in the 1990s was much faster and more orchestral than death metal, with fewer curving riffs to complicate its unrelenting assault. This wave of bands imported the crude beginning of 1980s black metal forefathers to capture their own evocative wash of night skies, natural wonder, and Nordic myths." Lastly, in Bang Your Head, The Rise and Fall of Heavy Metal, David Konow wrote, quote, "Many black metal bands grew out of Norway, and their fans believed in the music like they were following a satanic religion. Black metal bands usually wore corpse paint or ghoulish makeup." End quote.
All right. Okay. I think we've learned something here today. I have a real soft spot for heavy metal books. John, you know this. I read many a heavy metal tome. There are some really nice writing in some of those quotes, and I think there's some really interesting information, but I still believe that if you really want to just clearly and simply define a heavy metal subgenre, your best bet is nearly always a crowdsourced wiki definition. According to Metal Wiki, black metal is, quote, "an extreme subgenre of heavy metal music. Common traits include fast tempos, a shrieking vocal style, heavily distorted guitars played with tremolo picking, raw, lo-fi recording, unconventional song structures, and an emphasis on atmosphere. Artists often appear in corpse paint and adopt pseudonyms." Now, John, you got to admit, isn't that last one just really nice and clear?
Well, I have to say I did appreciate how that one actually talked about the music as opposed to all the academic definitions, which were just sort of content and clothing based.
Yeah, cultural and sort of window dressing. I mean, that's the thing, as we'll talk about with black metal, is I think that black metal very distinctly in its second wave evolved into a musical subgenre. But I think a good faith argument could be made that in its earlier days, and even the early days of the second wave, it really is in some sense kind of like glam metal. It's more about the aesthetic and the lyrical presentation than it is about any real shared musical content. Wow! Is first wave black metal really a musical genre per se? I don't know. I think that's tough to say. So that's one of the reasons that they were tending a little bit away from that. That said, I agree though. It is nice when people can just shut up and talk about the actual music itself.
You should remember that for yourself.
You're going to quote that back to me, aren't you?
I'm actually just going to clip that and send it to you before every recording.
That's not your worst idea. Anyhow, now that we have a sense of what black metal is, let's talk just a bit about some of the albums and artists that made up its proverbial first wave. Ooh, I know. This will be a perfect opportunity to whip out ye olden HM 101 timeline format. TM. Love it! John, give me that sexy, sexy timeline voice and introduce us, chronologically, to some of the landmark musical monuments of first wave black metal history.
November 1st, 1982, Venom released their seminal sophomore album, Black Metal.
All extreme metal, more or less, has its roots in what Motorhead and Discharge were doing in the 1970s. However, the first definitively extreme heavy metal band were the Nawabum Masters Venom. Aside from establishing many of the tropes that would come to be associated with black metal, satanic lyrics and imagery, the use of sinister pseudonyms, raw lo-fi album productions, rasped, dirty vocals, extreme musical velocity, etc., Venom also were responsible for coining the term black metal itself via the title of this second album, Coteen. John, I know you don't love Venom, but that's a pretty formative assortment of influential ideas, no?
Well, sure, I do have a question at this point that I'm asking in a snarky way, but I mean sincerely.
That could be on your tombstone, but please continue.
Where is Venom from?
They're from the UK.
So why is this episode titled Norwegian Black Metal?
Because we're gonna get to Norwegian black metal through an assortment of international influences that led to that proverbial second wave, which primarily took place in Norway.
Duh.
Now, obviously, we can't have a black metal episode without including the genre's eponymous anthem. So let's take ourselves a first listening break and acknowledge the importance of the old gods. Pause the podcast, click the link, and check out the classic opening title track from Venom's second album, Black Metal.
November 8th, 1982 through September 7th, 1984. The complete 80s discography of Merciful Fate.
In some ways, no band screams first wave black metal quite like Denmark's deliciously satanic Merciful Fate. That said, as a band that bears almost no musical resemblance to the second wave of black metal, I'd argue that this legendary band and their legendary 1980s discography were more conceptually than musically influential on the second wave. That said, there ain't no one ever who has done satanic lyrical themes and corpse paint like 80s Merciful Fate King Diamond did satanic lyrical themes and corpse paint. Also of note, the King's status as a true believer in a non-theistic Satanism. Although second-wave black metal Satanism did tend to be of the theistic variety, this idea of being the proverbial real thing would certainly come to inspire that next generation of Scandinavian hellraisers.
June 1983 to June 1st, 1987. Hellhammer, and the first great period of Celtic Frost.
Okay, hang on. Hellhammer and Celtic Frost are incredible and important stuff. But number one, we've covered it. And number two, I'm still planning to eventually do a deep dive into the complete Celtic Frost discography on a future standalone episode. So let's skip that for now. You love it when we skip things.
Praise be. October 1984 through October 17th, 1988. The pre-Viking metal Bathory discography.
Wait! An argument can readily be made that Bathory are the single most important first-wave black metal band, at least when it comes to establishing the template for black metal to come. And I do intend to talk a whole lot more about Bathory, but that is also going to happen on a future episode. In fact, that was a Patreon request. Yay, Patreon members! Don't worry, Korthon 100. It is in the works. We got you. More Bathory for everybody, just not today.
January 1985 through May 1986. Assorted influential early Teutonic thrash metal releases.
Ah, good. Now we're getting somewhere. This is a great time to consider this uniquely crude, raw, and dark species of thrash metal, which particularly influenced the second wave of black metal. A few German thrash bands whose early work telegraphed much black metal to come included Holy Moses, Destruction, Creator, and Sodom. It's notable that within the second wave black metal scene, American thrash was generally loathed, while German thrash was generally revered. But why would that be? Other than national origin, what's the difference? John, help a brother out, would ya?
A few notable differences emerge when comparing American and German thrash bands. Generally, the American musicians tended to be more proficient players, and a tight, chugging velocity was a hallmark of that sound. By contrast, while the Germans played just as fast, their sound tended to be looser, more chaotic, and more dissonant. Lyrically, while many of the bigger American thrash bands focused on political themes inspired by hardcore music, the German bands focused more exclusively on darkness, violence, and evil. A bit like Slayer, but German.
All right. I think we're still missing just one last crucial element in this discussion of proto/first wave black metal bands. We need to find one single band that brought it all together, both music and an image that really, truly, and unquestionably declared them as black metal. John, for this we're going to need to say goodbye to Germany. I hope you've got your samba shoes with you, my friend, because Heavy Metal 101 is off to Belo Horizonte, Brazil. John, did you have Brazilian metal on your black metal bingo card?
I sure didn't.
Not only was Brazil the birthplace of one of the greatest heavy metal bands of all time, the mighty Sepultura, but it was also the birthplace of Sarcophago, the first wave black metal band that may have most clearly presaged the coming of the Norwegian scene. John, it's time for an installment of everyone's favorite HM101 segment. John looks at shit and describes it to the audience. Yay!
Let's go. We haven't done this in a while.
I know, it's been so long. What do you see in this period photo of the fine, upstanding young gentleman who comprised the band Sarcophago?
Okay.
You see a lot, don't you?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. Okay, so we got 4 dudes, all wearing leather pants, leather tops.
It's black leather. We should note that it's all black leather.
Sure, it's black. Yeah, it is black leather. They've all got bandoliers on. All right, so I'm just going to work left to right here. So the guy on the left has kind of curly, long hair. He appears, well, it's kind of hard to say. I'm assuming they're all wearing that kind of corpse paint makeup.
Yes, they are.
With white faces, black around the eyes, and black lipstick, and then it's kind of black dribbling off the lips as though it were blood running out of their mouth, except it's black, so it really just looks like goo. So the guy on the left kind of looks like he's groaning and going, ugh, and he really doesn't want to be here. The guy towards the middle left looks to be holding up his hands as though he's looking through a telescope. You can't tell me that's not what you see.
I can't unsee it now.
Yeah, because that's what he's doing. The guy in the middle is holding a cross upside down.
Yes.
Very, very badly. And then the guy on the far right just saw his parents naked for the first time and is in a state of pure, just depressed shock.
He does have a 1,000-yard stare, doesn't he?
They look like they could be in like a church space, but the space is all black, and I think that's a statue, like a Jesus sculpture behind them.
Yeah, it looks like there's a black crucifix behind them with like a white crucified Jesus on it.
Yeah. I would call this picture very of its time.
I would call it very influential. They've got corpse paint, bullet belts, black leather, inverted crosses. Now, you can't see this, John, but I should also note the names of the dudes in the photograph. We've got vocalist, Antichrist, guitarist, Butcher, bassist, Incubus, and drummer, DD Crazy.
Is DD the one looking through a telescope?
I can only assume. I can't see half their faces, so I'm not totally sure. DD seems like the kind of guy who would be looking through a telescope. So basically here, we've got the look, we've got the black metal pseudonyms. Now, John, what would your black metal pseudonym be?
I don't even know. I would be so unwilling to even engage in this type of conversation legitimately.
You so would be standing in the back looking through a telescope, wouldn't you?
No, I'd be the 1,000-yard stare guy.
I could see that.
It's just like, why am I here?
The 1,000-yard stare guy. That's not actually a bad pseudonym. I like that.
There we go.
I thought about this myself. I decided I would take a page from Jewish folk history and go with Der Gallo. Anyhow, Sarcophago released their debut album, Inri, I-N-R-I, which is short for the Latin phrase meaning Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, in August of 1987. This band and album was a major influence on the second wave Norwegian black metal bands. Fenris of the second wave legends Darkthrone has described it as an album, quote, you buy or die. So, what do you think, John? Would you rather buy Inri or die?
I am excited to test this gentleman's theory and see if I live forever or if I die.
All right. We'll see. Keep us posted.
I will let you know.
It is a fantastic album, and tunes like the classic Satanic Lust are true blue first wave black metal. Great stuff. But enough. Enough with the damn preliminaries. John, it's second wave black metal time. Do you think you're ready for the blood, the fire, the death, and the story of mayhem and the rise of Norwegian black metal?
I am almost confident that I am not ready, but nevertheless we shall proceed.
Odin owns you all! Onward!
Mayhem, Part 1. Death Crush and the Death of Dead.
Gather around the campfire, children. We've a story to tell. Now, this might be just a little bit scary, it might be just a little bit gory, but as future heavy metal scholars, this is a story that you all need to hear. Mayhem. What's in a name, you ask? Well, rarely has a band chosen a more appropriate moniker. Mayhem first came together in Oslo, Norway in 1984, having taken their name from the Venom song Mayhem with Mercy. The original lineup consisted of Øystein Arseth, who took on the nom de plume Euronymous, bassist/vocalist Jørn Stubberud, who became Necrobutcher, and drummer Kjetil Estin Haraldsen Mannheim, who, in an apparent nod to the geographic center for the early development of the symphony orchestra, took his surname Mannheim as his black metal alias.
There's just no way that was his intention.
No, I'm totally kidding about the orchestral thing. I think he was probably just lazy. In 1986, this lineup released just 100 copies of a demo appropriately entitled Pure Fucking Armageddon, before recruiting a new singer, Sven Erik Christiansen, aka Maniac. John! Euronymous, Necrobutcher, Mannheim, and Maniac. I think you could have been good friends with these people, no?
I mean, look, I just want to hope all of these people are putting on a show, right? Like, I just want them to be happy, well-adjusted people.
This isn't going to go well for you. I get that, though. I want that same thing. I want you to know I would like that same thing. But it's not going to happen. In August of 1987, this lineup released the EP Death Crush via a record label newly founded by Euronymous, Poser Corpse Music. Death Crush! We have officially arrived at true Kult, that's spelled K-V-L-T, to be clear, Norwegian black metal. Second wave, motherfucker. And you, John, had the opportunity to sample it for yourself. What did you make of the delightful, indelible classic I put onto your playlist, Chainsaw Gutsfuck?
Okay, so, like, my definition that I gave up at the top was sincere. Like, I didn't hate this until they started singing. The instrumental side of this was not bad. There was some interesting stuff going on. It was coherent. There were fun sounds. There were interesting ideas. And then just as soon as the vocals start, it is the most horrendous thing on the planet.
I mean, I guess the good news is that Maniac, the singer on this EP, only lasted for the EP, so maybe they felt the same way. Maybe they felt that the singing was not up to snuff. I actually don't think that's the case. I think this was a really influential vocal performance that pointed the way towards the future of black metal, but I don't think that's a future meant for your enjoyment, John McKeever.
That is clearly true.
I've always really liked Death Crush. It weighs in at a short, sweet 17 and a half minutes, which is nice. It just gets in and out before causing any trouble beyond its chaotic cacophony. Now, John, could you please share a few Death Crush fun facts with us?
Oh, Eric, it would be my pleasure. Number 1, the percussive electronic opener of the EP, entitled Silvester Anfang, was created by a German composer named Konrad Schnitzler. According to Mayhem mythos, Euronymous camped outside of Schnitzler's house, refusing to leave until he was allowed in and provided the band a piece they could use as an album intro. Fun fact number 2. Death Crush includes a cover of the Venom classic Witching Hour, further demonstrating the monumental influence Venom had on the Norwegian black metal bands. Number 3, initially just 1,000 copies of the EP were released, and it wasn't reissued until 1993.
Now, sadly, my own copy is of a reissue, but John, if you're looking to buy me an evil birthday present this year, I would love a first edition copy of Death Crush. But I digress. Let's take a listening break. Chainsaw Guts Fuck time, everybody. Pause the podcast, click the link, think dark, grotesque thoughts, and we'll be right back.
Chainsaw in my bleeding hands as I start to cut you in two. Your guts are steaming out, and I just love the sight.
So lovely. So lovely. Mayhem were still, at this point, in the process of finding their unique musical voice on Death Crush, but they were well on their way. Maniac and Mannheim left Mayhem in 1988 and were replaced by two iconic figures in black metal history. Swedish vocalist Pelle Yngve Olin, who went by the name Dead, and an extraordinary drummer and utterly loathsome human being named Jan Axel Blomberg, aka Hellhammer. And here is where our story really picks up some steam.
Extremely on-brand Dead anecdote number 1.
Dead auditioned for Mayhem by sending them a package which included 3 items: a demo album, a letter detailing his ideas, and the decaying body of a crucified mouse.
Extremely on-brand Dead anecdote number 2.
One day, while out on tour with Mayhem, Dead came across the corpse of a crow. He picked it up and put it into a plastic bag. Thereafter, in order to get inspired before an evening's gig, he would open the bag and take a big whiff of the rotting bird. Tagging on to that anecdote, Dead was also known to frequently cut himself, sometimes dangerously deeply, while performing live. John, do you think you're beginning to get something of a sense of who this Dead fellow was via the illustrative power of these anecdotes?
This is not a well-adjusted person.
No. Dead had issues. Dead was morbidly fascinated by death. To a fault. All of which leads us to...
Extremely on-brand Dead anecdote number 3, although it is simultaneously a Euronymous anecdote in a way that makes him look like a bit of a fucking monster.
After 1990, Dead's relationship with Euronymous began to deteriorate, and his depression spiraled out of control. And on April 8th, 1991, Dead committed suicide, slitting his wrists and shooting himself in the head with a shotgun. He was just 22 years old. This anecdote continues, however, as, upon discovering Dead's body, Euronymous chose not to immediately notify the authorities, but instead left the scene and went to a store to buy a disposable camera. He returned to the house and took pictures of the corpse. He then gathered some of the skull fragments, which he would eventually turn into necklaces, which he gave as gifts to select members of the black metal scene's inner circle. Well, this just about ends part 1 of the story of Mayhem. John, how are you feeling about these people as of right now?
Less surprised about this guy getting stabbed to start this whole episode.
You can kind of see it coming a mile away, right?
Jesus Christ.
There were a lot of genuinely shitty people in the black metal scene in Norway, but Dead appears not to have been one of those. He seems to have just been a really depressed, death-obsessed weirdo who is also a genuinely talented artist, lyricist, and frontman. While he never got the opportunity to formally record with Mayhem, he did write the lyrics for some of the best songs on Mayhem's full-length debut. And for those interested in what Mayhem sounded like with Dead, I strongly suggest Live in Leipzig, a live album recorded in November of 1990. And in one final piece of not everyone in this scene totally sucked news, following Dead's killing himself and Euronymous' atrocious post-mortem behavior, Necrobutcher, both saddened and enraged, left Mayhem. Now, look, even by our standards, this is all pretty fucking dark, so let's tiptoe ourselves away from all the Mayhem lunacy for a little bit and take a look elsewhere at some of the most important actual music making that would emerge from the Norwegian black metal scene. John, how does that sound?
Us talking about music, I don't know, feels controversial for this podcast.
Shut up. Cue me, baby!
Darkthrone and black metal's unholy trinity.
The band Darkthrone first came together in the town of Kolbotn, Norway in 1986. They began their musical career playing a fairly straight-ahead iteration of Scandinavian-style death metal, something they did well enough to eventually get signed to Peaceville Records, an important British indie label certain to pop up again on future HM101 episodes. Darkthrone released their death metal debut, Soulside Journey, on January 13th, 1991. Now, John, at this point, you've only had the opportunity to hear black metal Darkthrone. Are you at all curious to hear what their early death metal sounded like?
No.
Well, it's your loss. It's actually really excellent. But following the release of Soulside Journey, Darkthrone fell under the sway of Euronymous and switched over to the black metal camp. Aside from a drastic shift in their oral and visual aesthetic, the band members took on the requisite evil aliases. Vocalist/guitarist Ted Skellum became Nocturno Culto. Guitarist Ivar Enger was now Zephyrus, and drummer Gilv Nagel became Fenris. Bassist Dag Nilsson, the John McKeever of the group, apparently just wasn't feeling the switch. He did play on their next album, but was only credited, sans any cool alias, as a session musician, and he departed soon thereafter. Now, John, why don't you tell us just a bit about Darkthrone's preposterously iconic second album?
I will do that, but first I have to say that all of those names sound like Final Fantasy villains.
These guys probably played Final Fantasy. I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Hell yeah. On February 26, 1992, Darkthrone released A Blaze in the Northern Sky, the first of 3 consecutive black metal masterpieces known collectively by genre fans as the Unholy Trinity. Their label, Peaceville, was so confused by the band's drastic musical change that they at first refused to release the album without a remix. A bit of brinksmanship followed, with Darkthrone threatening to release their version of A Blaze in the Northern Sky via Euronymous' new label, Death Like Silence Productions. Peaceville backed down, and the world was gifted with Norwegian black metal's first definitive musical masterpiece.
Indeed we were. Such a gift. Well said, my friend. Darkthrone also helped to lock in the visual aesthetic of black metal with this release. So, John, take a look at the cover of A Blaze in the Northern Sky and tell us what you see there.
Well, barely anything, because most of it is just a black square.
Black.
Now, in the top left, we have what is a remarkably legible spelling of Darkthrone.
But you'd agree it's darting towards the illegibility that we associate with the genre.
Yes. It is moving towards that trend of being totally illegible, which Is someone going to explain that at some point?
I mean, it's kind of, it's a continuation of this true cult idea where if you know, you know, and if you don't know, we don't want you to know. That's the idea.
Fuck these people. In stark contrast to that, in the bottom, in what appears to be Times New Roman, the Ablaze in the Northern Sky album title is just printed in all caps.
Fair.
Not quite in the center, just sort of off-center, we see a corpse-painted, grimacing face. Presumably, there is a body attached to that. I can kind of make out a hand. But that's sort of all you can see in this album cover.
Yeah, so dark, simple, shadowy, certainly sinister, as long as you ignore the Times New Roman font. This is definitely the visual template upon which many of these early black metal albums, and some contemporary black metal albums, frankly, are going to ride. This whole idea of like the single corpse-painted face and the primarily dark cover or black cover, etc., etc. So this is what black metal albums tended to look like and often still do. There you go. For the record, that's Zephyrus on the cover, who would last just one more album with the band before they would trim themselves down to a duo configuration consisting of just Fenriz and Nocturno Culto. Their third album was Under a Funeral Moon, released on February 15th, 1993. It is great. However, my personal favorite of the Unholy Trinity, a perfect distillation of the 90s Norwegian black metal sound, is their fourth album, Transylvanian Hunger. Released on February 17th, 1994, this was the first Darkthrone album on which Fenriz performed all the instruments and Nocturno Culto just sang. Transylvanian Hunger is entirely emblematic of the sonic palette associated with the mature second-wave black metal sound. Raw, noisy, lo-fi production, raspy, witchy, tortured vocals, darkly gothic, heavily distorted tremolo guitar lines, and lots of blast beats in the drums. Musical paradigm fully clarified, so it must be listening break time. We're going to check out the black metal perfection embodied by the opening title track of Transylvanian Hunger. Pause the podcast, slather on the corpse paint, light the black candles, sacrifice the virgins. Then click the link and rock out to some true cult black metal goodness. John, I'm not even going to ask you if you liked that. But what I will ask, I do have a question. What I will ask is, were you able to hear, as advertised, raw, noisy, lo-fi production, raspy, witchy, tortured vocals, darkly gothic, heavily distorted tremolo guitar lines, and blast-beating drums?
All of those things definitely came across, and knowing that it was one individual performing all the instruments helped clarify why. I was like, do these guys just have the shittiest drummer in the world? No, it was one guy doing a million things, and he probably wasn't great at drums. Got it.
I have to say that Fenriz's primary instrument is drums.
You're shitting me. For real?
This is the thing. If you go and listen to Soulside Journey, their death metal album, you'll hear excellent drumming. Polished, well put together, complicated, very competent, very high level playing. On that album, they intentionally, I don't want to say dumb down, but make sloppy, make chaotic, crazy, very, very lo-fi, very low complexity musical decisions in this idiom to like make it feel something otherworldly, something made by animals or creatures of the woods or whatever. Suffice it to say, Fenriz actually is a very competent drummer, but there is a reason behind all of that sort of sloppy drumming.
Okay.
I'm glad we had this talk. By way of transition, I will note that Darkthrone, unfortunately, were not wholly immune to black metal controversy/stupidity, and they did get themselves into some hot water for some anti-Semitic remarks associated with Transylvanian Hunger. This is not great, but they did at least have the good sense to eventually apologize, and that's not nothing. Speaking of terrible behavior, I think it's time to check back in with our good pals from the band Mayhem. How does that sound, friendo?
Oh boy.
Look, I'm sure everything from here on out is going to be sunshine and roses for our boys in Mayhem. Where were we?
Mayhem Part 2. De Mysterious Dom Satanis.
Ah, children, you aren't afraid yet, are you? Well, don't worry, because this next part of our twisted tale
begins in hell!
By which, of course, I mean the basement record shop, Helvet, the Norwegian word for hell, that Euronymous opened in Oslo in the summer of 1991. The store quickly became the central gathering spot for the inner circle of Norway's burgeoning black metal scene, which included a particularly intense young man, born Christian Virkenes, though he changed his first name to Varg and took on the black metal pseudonym Count Grishnak. As founder of the one-man black metal project Burzum, as well as for other reasons, Virkenes will come to play a central role later in this tale. Key player alert, John. Did you get that?
Yeah, I got it.
John, would you agree that putting a bunch of angry young dudes together into a dark basement for extended periods of time is potentially a recipe for negative outcomes?
Why were they there for extended periods of time? It's a record store. You go in, you buy the records, you leave. What's going on?
Yeah, this didn't work that way. This was like 24/7 hanging out there. A lot of them slept there.
Seems like a bad business model.
Yeah, it didn't actually do very well and closed down not that long after it opened, but still fermented some interesting happenings. Young dudes are the worst, and these young dudes were no exception. By 1992, things had gotten to the point where what had formerly been black metal words and posing began to develop into black metal actions, when members of the scene began a campaign of church arsons all across Norway, setting fire to a number of the ancient wooden structures for which Norway was famed. Some of these structures dated all the way back to the 12th century. Now, John, I'm curious, would you describe yourself as pro or anti-church burning?
I am anti-church burning. I'm also anti-church, anti-both.
I see. Yeah, I completely agree. We're on the same page here. Anti-church burning, anti-church.
Yeah.
You can do both. Now, not only were members of the black metal scene setting fires to churches, but rather audaciously, they were also using images of these burning churches on their album covers. The Burzum EP Ask, which appropriately is Norwegian for ashes, features a picture of the remains of the first church to burn, Fantoft Stave Church. The good news is that the burning of these beautiful ancient structures was always done at night when they were empty. So that's something. Still, it is most definitely worth mentioning that a firefighter did die while putting out one of these fires, and this is utterly, utterly awful. And speaking of death, things took a still darker turn on August 21st, 1992. On that night, a member of the Inner Circle, 21-year-old Emperor drummer Baird Ethan, aka Faust, while walking home from a bar, came across a gentleman named Manja Andresen. Andresen made a pass at Faust, and rather than just walking on, Faust seemingly acquiesced. They walked together into a secluded park, where Faust then stabbed Andresen to death. This was the first, but not last, intentional murder committed by a member of Norwegian black metal's Inner Circle. John, this is pretty fucking rough, huh?
Well, it's just sort of atrocious. It's what it is. It's not rough. It's horrible. These are horrible people, Eric. Why are we talking about them?
It's a fair question.
It feels like we're kind of glorifying what you are also describing as horrifying and horrible people. Why are we doing this?
I would argue that the music that they made and that the legacy that they left, which was very mixed at best, is also important. It's also worthy of discussion, worthy of remembrance, and frankly pretty fucking fascinating.
We're going to have to disagree on that.
Okay. I think that's fair. I am unsurprised by your contention. All right, let's again take a step away from all the criminality and look at more actual music making. See if I can't sway you. Maybe I'll convince you. Because now is as good a time as any to discuss the recording of Mayhem's full-length debut, De Mysteris Dom Satans, aka The Mysteries of the Lord Satan, which they recorded between June of 1992 and May of 1993. Now, for reasons that will eventually become apparent, the album wasn't actually released until 1994, more on that later. When last we left Mayhem, Dead was deceased, and Necrobutcher had departed, leaving just Euronymous and Hellhammer as the remaining members of the band. For this recording, a much-esteemed idiosyncratic vocalist, imported over from the influential Hungarian band Tormentor, Attila Cesar, was brought in to take over vocal duties. And that fellow we mentioned earlier, Varg Vikernes, was brought in to play bass. Ooh, John, you're a music theater buff. I have a fun Attila fact to share with you. You want to hear it?
I can't wait to hear how this is related to musical theater.
Attila Cesar, who, in the ensuing years, has had a fabulously diverse career, both with and without Mayhem, performed as Caiaphas in a Hungarian production of Jesus Christ Superstar in the year 2000. Black metal meets Jesus Christ. How fun is that?
We have talked about how that I just hate Andrew Lloyd Webber, right?
We have talked about that, yes.
Yeah, so thank you for tying this episode about music I hate into a musical I hate.
I'm here for you, buddy. It's what I do. Anyhow, despite or hell, more likely because of all the chaos surrounding its production, ever since its release, the mysterious Dom Satanas has been regarded by many as the singular masterpiece of Norwegian black metal. John, a release this significant obviously merits a listening break, right?
I suppose.
That's what we're gonna do! The second track on De Mysteris, Freezing Moon, featuring, incidentally, lyrics penned by Dead, is arguably Mayhem's most iconic song. I suggest listening for a lot of those same attributes we discussed re Transylvanian Hunger, but also for Attila's quirky vocal performance. It is like nothing else in the genre. Pause the podcast, step out into the moonlit forest's frozen pitch-black darkness, and click the link in the show notes. We'll see you, assuming you survive, on the other side.
Everything here is so cold. Everything here is so dark. I remember it as from a dream in the corner of this time. Diabolic shapes float by out from the dark. I remember it was here I died, by following the freezing moon. It's night again. Night, you beautiful. I please my hunger on living humans. Night of hunger, follow its call. Follow the freezing moon.
So creepy. So lovely. So much English as a second language. Still, John, wasn't that creepy and lovely?
My reading of that or the song?
I mean, I think both came together in beautiful harmony.
Okay.
It's great. It's great stuff. It's great stuff. Now, before the horrific conclusion of the Tale of Mayhem, we're going to talk about three other seminal early Norwegian black metal masters, one highly problematic, and two who are utterly fantastic. Let's begin with the most problematic artist in this rogues gallery of problematic artists.
It's gotta be a podcast high for shitty people.
This is a record we won't soon break, I promise you that.
Jesus. Burzum. Apparently we have to talk about fucking Burzum.
Reminding us that, at their core, the members of the black metal inner circle were just a bunch of dorks. I will note here that the word Burzum means darkness in J.R.R. Tolkien's fictional Black Speech from The Lord of the Rings. Nerd alert! Burzum was the one-man black metal project of the aforementioned Varg Vikernes, a.k.a. Count Grishnak. Burzum was established in 1991 and signed to Euronymous' Deathlike Silence Productions. And I will here and now admit the following. Despite his being a total monster, Varg Vikernes did make some really exceptional music in the early days of Burzum. The first 4 Burzum albums were all recorded between January of 1992 and March of 1993, which is a pretty impressive timeline for cranking out 4 genre classics, don't you think?
It'd be impressive if the goal wasn't to make shitty music, to sound edgy and cool.
Now, I have to say, I didn't put any Burzum on your playlist, so maybe you'll like Burzum.
I guess we'll never know.
Now, aside from his penchant for setting fire to ancient churches and virulent racism and anti-Semitism, Vikernes had some genuinely interesting musical ideas.
Can we just put that aside?
No, they are central to his identity as a human being, and everyone who meets him should spit on him. But because we've talked about this before, I will acknowledge the fact that a lot of terrible human beings have made a lot of really great music, and I personally think that the first 4 Burzum albums qualify as really great music.
Okay.
Your mileage may vary. On these albums, Vikernes synthesized elements of ambient electronica and musical minimalism with black metal, and thoughtfully experimented with lo-fi recording and performance techniques. Although for various reasons it wasn't actually released until 1996, my favorite Burzum album is number 4, Philosophem. On that album, instead of using a guitar amp, Vikernes plugged his guitar into his brother's cheapy stereo amplifier, and he recorded his vocals through a helicopter headset instead of a microphone. John! Lo-fi black metal minimalism! Does that sound cool or what?
No.
So good. It is. I wish it weren't. I wish it weren't. Varg Vikernes was and is an awful excuse for a human being. But his early music making was great and important, and there is value in checking out those first 4 albums. That said, I'm going to penalize him here by not including any Burzum listening break or any links. Ha! That's going to show him, right?
Is this guy still alive?
Yeah, he's still alive.
Jesus.
Yeah, he's still with us. Only the good die young, John. Only the good die young.
I don't even think we can say that.
Fuck you, Varg. You suck, and HM101 doesn't like you. Moving on!
That's the first sentence you've said in this podcast that I've agreed with. Immortal, who says black metal can't be fun.
Whoa, you said that weird.
I sure did.
It's like John the Leprechaun all of a sudden. Woo!
Immortal, who says black metal can't be fun.
Who indeed? We couldn't get through this episode without devoting some time to my favorite of the classic Norwegian black metal bands, Immortal. John, you have been a real trooper today. In honor of the mental and physical toughness you have heretofore displayed on this episode, I'd like you to take the reins and introduce my beloved Immortal.
Immortal first emerged onto the Norwegian black metal scene in 1991, founded by singer/guitarist Olve Ekemo, better known as Abath, and guitarist Harald Nevdal, aka Demonaz. Following a self-titled EP in 1991, Immortal released their full-length debut, Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism, on July 1st of 1992. The debut lineup included Abath on bass and vocals, Demonaz on guitars, and a short-lived drummer named Armageddon.
I suppose I should clarify that he didn't die, he just left the band after this album. In this episode, that's probably necessary to clarify.
Yep, good clarification.
Immortal really weren't involved with any of the bad shit. They were pretty clean in that respect. Before we break to watch the delightful, iconic video for The Call of the Winter Moon from their debut, please allow me to present a few fun facts about Immortal. Number 1. Rather than Satanism, most of their lyrics center around a fictional, quote, demon and battle-filled, end quote, frozen land that they invented called Blashruk. Such nerds, such fun! To my mind, Immortal have the strongest discography of any of the classic Norwegian black metal bands, though Enslaved are certainly in that discussion as well. But across the 1990s, each Immortal album got successively better, peaking with their 1999 masterpiece, At the Heart of Winter. 3. We've talked about a lot of important early black metal albums today, but my personal pick to represent the platonic ideal of the second wave Norwegian black metal sound is Immortal's second album, Pure Holocaust. If one was to listen to just one second wave black metal album, Pure Holocaust would be an excellent choice. Okay, All that having been said, we simply must watch a music video for our Immortal break, as there is little more delightful in all of black metal media than the goofy, weird 1992 video that the band released for The Call of the Winter Moon from Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism. John, it's time to watch some good old-fashioned black metal cavorting from a band that was not involved in any of the atrocious behavior we have discussed today. Won't that be nice?
Refreshing.
So pause the show, be sure to grab your best witch's hat, click the link, watch the video. Let's go! Now, John, is that a good time or what?
That gives off the vibe of like nerdy 13-year-olds saying like, Mom, I'm borrowing the camera. Okay, sweetie, have a good time with your friends.
I totally shot videos like that when I was 13.
Yeah, I mean, same. Like one of them was like, guys, check it out. I learned how to breathe fire. And I was like, oh, that's the whole video. Like, that's it. This is it. Here's the concept. Also, check out my cool hat.
Ooh, I got my cape. so good. I loved watching your face when the first scream came in. The whole thing just crumbled. I know it's not for you, but this is the charming side of black metal. I mean, it's not nearly so unpleasant as a lot of the other stuff, and I like to wallow in the unpleasant. I will not lie about that. But this stuff is just delightful, I think.
Well, it certainly was less unpleasant.
I appreciate that. And again, for the record, I think Immortal are one of those bands that, like, with each successive album got substantially better. The first one is definitely very raw and very rough, and they just improved exponentially over time. Okay, last band before our heart-rending and soul-shattering finale. Give it to me!
Emperor, or what happens when progressive and symphonic metal meet true good black metal.
John, symphonic black metal. Now, as an orchestral conductor, I can only assume that you're a huge fan of that subgenre?
So, what do you mean by symphonic black metal?
Okay, so let's be clear about this. In the earliest days of quote-unquote symphonic metal, whether that be Black Death or other, the symphonic portion was simply played by keyboards. It is keyboards emulating the sort of textural gestures one could, especially if one wasn't terribly familiar with symphonic repertoire, associate with a symphony or with an orchestra or with quote-unquote classical music. Now, I will say that in the ensuing years, black metal bands, whatever, symphonic metal bands in general, have risen enough in status and in connections and all that there are a number of them that do work in tandem with actual symphony orchestras now, creating a more authentically symphonic metal.
Yeah, like the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, right?
Now, no, but the Trans-Siberian Orchestra is, in fact, the brainchild of the people involved with the band Savatage, the Florida progressive band Savatage. So, all right, fine. Maybe a little bit, sort of, kind of.
I look forward to next year's holiday episode wherein we just focus on the Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Regardless, there was no one who did more to expand the sonic palette of second-wave black metal than the mighty Emperor, who first came together in 1991, founded by guitarist/vocalist Vegard Sver Tveten, a.k.a. Isan, and guitarist Thomas Thormandester Hogan, a.k.a. Samuth. Samuth and Isan have always been the core of Emperor, but the earliest lineup under that name also included Mortis on bass and the aforementioned murderer, Faust, on drums, prior to his conviction. This lineup recorded a self-titled EP, which was released by Candlelight Records in May of 1993, and then signed to Euronymous' Death Like Silence Productions. Shortly thereafter, Mortis left to form his own electronica/black metal project and was replaced by the difficult-to-pronounce Tchort, Tchort, on bass. This was the lineup that recorded one of the most iconic albums in black metal history, Emperor's debut full-length, In the Nightside Eclipse. Now, John, my sense was that if any of these early Norwegian black metal bands might possibly be able to get through to you, it would have to be Emperor, who are much more technically accomplished, sophisticated musicians than most of their peers. I included the wonderful classic I Am the Black Wizards on your playlist. So what did you make of this early slab of symphonic black metal goodness?
I mean, again, as I've said over and over, like the instrumentals on this were fine. I didn't dislike it. There was an arc. It happened. There were things, but I just cannot get past the vocalizing.
I could see that. It is traditional, scritchy black metal vocals. Just with a, again, more elaborate, somewhat more progressive, more richly textured black metal accompaniment. But I get it. Your barrier to entry is going to be extreme growled and shrieked vocals. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm. That's a non-starter for me.
All right. Got it. In the Nightside Eclipse, released on February 21st, 1994, is my personal favorite of all the formative black metal debuts we've discussed today. While Emperor's subsequent work would hone just a bit too prog for my tastes, their debut was a pitch-perfect synthesis of black symphonic and prog elements. This needs to be celebrated. Let's have ourselves one final listening break and bask in the magnificence of I Am the Black Wizard. Dear listener, witness the birth of symphonic black metal. Okay, John. I know you hate it when I do this, but in order to finish the story, we're going to need to backtrack just a teeny tiny bit.
It's like you don't even understand what a timeline is. You say we're going to do a timeline, and then it's just full of loop-de-loops.
Not full of loop. There's one or two loop-de-loops. It's fun. Who wants to ride a timeline roller coaster without the occasional loop-de-loop?
I mean, people who understand what timelines are?
Well, I'm not one of those people.
Clearly.
You see, in the autumn of 1993, Norwegian authorities became noticeably more interested in the activities of the black metal inner circle that surrounded Euronymous, eventually leading to the arrests of, among others, Emperor Samuth for participating in church burnings, and Faust, at last, for that murder he had committed. But why was this? What was the straw which had broken the camel's back, finally leading the police to black metal's inner circle?
Mayhem, Part 3, The Murder of Euronymous.
And so here we are, at the end of this sordid tale. Though they started off as friends, the relationship between Varg Vikernes and Euronymous deteriorated throughout 1993. This was primarily the result of ongoing tensions about just who should be at the top of the Norwegian black metal pecking order, but it also didn't help that financial issues arose between them, with Euronymous owing Varg a sizable amount of money. All of this came to a head on August 10th, 1993. That evening, Varg made the nearly 7-hour drive from Bergen to Oslo, showing up at Euronymous' apartment building in the middle of the night. He knocked on the door, claiming that he was hand-delivering a signed contract. What precisely happened next is hard to say.
Vikernes later claimed self-defense, but an altercation ensued which resulted in the dead body of Euronymous, after having been stabbed 23 times by Vikernes, being discovered in the stairwell of his apartment building.
A Kerrang! Magazine cover story in March of 1993 had recently made the Norwegian black metal scene and the associated crimes international news. With the murder of Euronymous, things went supernova, and the story of Norwegian black metal embedded itself deep within the larger heavy metal mythos. things would never be quite the same thereafter. But John, I'm sure you're wondering what happened in the aftermath of the murder, no?
Postlude, after the death of Euronymous.
Varg was arrested just over a week later, on August 19th, and was sentenced to Norway's remarkably lenient maximum sentence for both murder and arson of 21 years in prison. He was released on parole in 2009, and these days can be found making an endless array of shitty, dark, new age music and fascist, racist propaganda videos.
Ooh, you suck!
Faust was arrested shortly after Varg and ended up serving 14 years for murder. He was released in 2003 and currently drums for the Norwegian black metal band Djevel. Unlike Vikernes, he has come to express remorse for his actions during the 1990s. Samuth ended up serving 16 months in prison for his involvement with the church burnings, and was then back making music with Emperor until they split, sort of, in 2001.
That's fucking wild.
What, all the jail time and the returning to life thereafter?
Yeah.
Like, the sentences are pretty crazy short, right?
Very.
I mean, Scandinavian liberalism is good in a lot of ways. Most ways, probably. But definitely some very lenient prison terms.
That's nuts.
Yeah, it's crazy. Let's put just one last black bow of shittiness onto this episode.
Great.
Euronymous, you'll remember, was murdered prior to the release of the mysterious Dom Satanas. Varg, the dude who murdered him, had played bass on the recording sessions for that album. With Hellhammer now in charge of the forthcoming release, Euronymous' family requested, for obvious reasons, that he please remove Varg's bass tracks prior to releasing the album. He solemnly agreed to do so and to have them re-recorded. In reality, however, he did no such thing, releasing the album in May of 1994 with Varg's original bass lines intact. And here is what Hellhammer had to say about that. Quote, "I thought it was appropriate that the murderer and victim were on the same record. I put word out that I was re-recording the bass parts, but I never did." And on that note, my beloved friend, we leave this story behind. John, we did it! How are you feeling?
This was just so shitty. It was just shitty people, shitty music. I don't understand how you enjoy this at all.
Yeah, we're very different people, and I think perhaps almost more so than any other subject we've covered, this may illustrate the gulf of difference between us. My morbid, intense fascination, both musically and narratively, and your relatively understandable disgust with the entire thing.
It's so bizarre because of the two of us, like, you're the happy-go-lucky person. Why this?
Yeah, I'll need to talk to my therapist about that. I should probably see a therapist.
Yeah, probably.
Look, we probably both need to take a good long shower after this one, but I am proud of us. And especially you. You did great work, pal. Alrighty then. Let's finish up with a quick bit of housekeeping. And then we're going to let everyone go and do whatever it is our listeners do when they're not listening to our episodes. I assume they all just stare at the wall blankly until the next episode drops, but what do I know? John, keep the house, would you?
They actually all just look like that one guy from the picture you made me describe.
The 1,000-yard stare. The sarcophago 1,000-yard stare.
I hope that they'll have access to that picture somehow so that they can see.
I'll see what I can do. That's fair. I'll do my best. Certainly Patreon.
It'll be on Patreon, that's right. Beloved listeners, please do consider rating, reviewing, and or sharing our content. Anything you can do to help get the word out is truly much appreciated. And don't forget that exclusive content like this picture we've been talking about for the last 2 hours is available for just $3 a month through our Patreon page. The Patreon link is in this episode's notes.
We can also be reached via social media, email, or voicemail, and those links are also available in the episode notes. Do feel free to drop us a line anytime. John, I've put you through a lot today. You should go and make yourself a stiff drink. I think you've earned it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Instead of saying goodbye, allow me to offer you these solemn and beautiful parting words, courtesy of beloved black metal father figure, King Diamond. So many tears in my eyes. I had to look away. How can I say the word that never should be said? I lay my broken heart to rest, and so I set you free.
Okay. Hey, let's never do that again.
Again, 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 again.